Well, g'day everyone. Wanted to talk to you about a really sort of interesting development over the last day or so. I was reading an article this morning talking about now how Sony had overtaken Nikon to become the #2 manufacturer or for sales. This is probably only in Japan though, but boy, it is still a big development. We did know that Sony mentioned a while ago that they said they wanted to become the #1 selling platform for cameras by 2021. And now they seem to be actually doing big moves, which is really interesting. So I'm going to take you through this article that will explain a little bit about that. And then we can have a discussion down below if you want to sort of leave some comments and things like that. So let's have a look at the article now. Okay, so before I actually show you the article, I just wanted to sort of talk about where I came from. And I saw the writing on the wall that this was going to happen 3 years ago when I switched from Nikon to Sony. At the time, I wanted to get back as much investment for the gear that I had. Now, I had big investment in Nikon. I had the D4S, I had a D810, and all the lenses that come with that, like the 70-200, the 24-70, and the 14-24mm as well as other prime lenses that all went with that system. So I had a really big Nikon sort of system that I was running at the time. Now, I didn't want to lose much money, so I thought, well, I looked at what Sony was bringing out at the time, and at that time I was really interested in doing something like fusion or hybrid work, which meant I was going to do stills and video at the same time. Now, the original one that I got was the A7 II, and at the time that probably was nowhere near, well, it was nowhere near what I was getting with my stills work with, say, something like the D4S. So I did lack that side of things, but I gained in the video side of things. But I could see that where the future was going to be. I thought the future was going to be mirrorless, and I could see that Sony were going to keep developing, and it wouldn't take them long to probably pass what the current Nikon cameras I had would do. So I thought, well, I was going to sell them while I could, and I did get very, very good money back for those cameras and lenses, which was great. So it meant that I didn't lose too much. But it didn't surprise me, and like I said, I could see that this was going to happen, and it's taken a little bit longer than what I thought, but it seems to be that they have just overtaken Nikon. Now, like I said, this may just be in Japan, but if we look at the article here, it says here that Sony is now #2 in the digital camera sales as Nikon falls to #3. And it says there's a changing guard at the top of the camera market. Sony has reportedly become the #2 brand in overall digital camera sales behind Canon, dropping Nikon to #3. And that really, in a way, it's quite sad for Nikon. And as we know, recently they have been struggling, and I've talked about that in some of the live shows that we've been putting out as well. And this just also well, it probably won't help either, but what they're saying is the Nikon reports that Nikon is projected to have been overtaken by Sony in digital camera sales in the current fiscal year, as Nikon gears up to report its first loss in its imaging product business. And like I said, I've discussed that before. And if you look at this graph that's here, you can see, let me just move this over a little bit. You can see here that overall, Canon is also dropping. I mean, they are all dropping in sales. Sony hasn't been quite as bad. If you look, it's sort of petered out a little bit. But Canon sales have been dropping quite substantially as well. But Nikon down here have dipped just recently, where they've gone below what Sony have been doing. So there is, yes, still a gap between Canon and Sony. But Sony appears to be leveling out a little bit, whereas Canon and Nikon both are dropping, but Nikon has definitely now gone below Sony here as well. If you're talking about this, which is interesting though, it's saying that Sony is now also sitting at #1 in the full frame system cameras, having taken the lead over from Canon in the last couple of years. So if you're talking about just full frame cameras, not cameras overall, like your compacts and everything else. If you look last year, Nikon was 29.1, Canon was 37.8, and Sony was 31.6. Well, now it's 24 for Nikon, Canon has dropped to 36, and Sony has jumped up to 38. So it's really interesting when you look at those figures, particularly what's happened in those sales. Now, the interesting thing too is I'm not sure what it's going to be like in the coming months. You know, like, I think perhaps the Z7 series are selling a little bit better. Perhaps the Canon series is also selling a little bit better. But we're going to have to wait for those sales reports to come out. It says one of the biggest blunders by Nikon, both according to outside analysts and Nikon's own financial results, was entering the full-frame mirrorless camera race too late. By the time the Z6 and Z7 were unveiled in August 2018, Sony already had a dominant sales in cameras and lenses. So it's interesting when you look at these figures. What's happened. Like I said all along that Canon and Nikon should have jumped into this way earlier than what they did. And have they left it too late? This is the interesting thing. But I discussed this in my last live broadcast on Saturday, that Canon seems to have made a little bit of a comeback recently. I've noticed a lot of YouTubers and stuff are now pushing Canon. I'm not sure whether that they're being paid endorsements or what, but there does seem to be a little bit of a shift back to the EOS R series cameras, and whether Canon, if they did bring out a more high-ended model, may be able to grab back all of that traction as well. Like I think the Canon particularly was hurt by the one card slot and the ridiculous crop that they put on the EOS R for 4K. But if they did get around that, like Canon may be the sleeping giant that may really bounce back. But it looks like from this though, I'm just wondering whether Nikon have left it too late, and that would be really sad because I would love Nikon to survive, and it seems to be that it's a bit of a shame. I'd love to know your opinion about this down below, so leave your sort of responses down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Apart from that, guys, I'll see you all soon in the next video. Bye for now.